start off and answer some questions. All right, good evening, everyone. Let me see if I can share this. We are moving into, let me get that off. We're moving into the home stretch, everybody. And next week, we are wrapping it up. So what do we have this week? What do we have this week? Pull up our syllabus. I hope that you're doing well. Let me also make this disclaimer. Be very careful. There's a storm coming through. I'm not sure what part of Atlanta area you're in. My skies are looking a little bit better, but the wind was just howling. The trees were just bending like paper clips. So please be careful. And if you lose power or internet, we totally understand. And also for me, if something happens here, but it looks like it might be all right. We didn't get too much rain. And just be careful, be careful, be careful. All right, everyone, we are wrapping it up. We are finding ourselves in week 8. Today, we're going to be back doing a guided reading of chapter 4, and we're going to talk about the basics of the African American sermon. We talked about um, some distinct things that are found in, in African American preaching last week. You turned in your outlines, and I finished maybe about half of them. I finished grading about half of them, and the other half I'm still working on. What are you doing this week and next week? You are tweaking those outlines, and now you are practicing. We were having this chat earlier before we got started with our session tonight. Your job is to tweak the outline with any comments that I gave you. So I know some people don't have them back yet. I'm working on them because I read all of them. And you want to also time it and practice it. Most of your outlines are getting long, which is good because that means that you are working and you're researching. But then when you time it, it also kind of depends on how fast you talk, but you don't want to you don't want to go too fast where we don't know what you're talking about. So here's the thing. Some students had a lot of points. Remember, follow follow my outline example. So 2 compliments are good, or 3 compliments, but don't go over 3. Another thing that I'm noticing in the outlines, we want to keep it real simple. Keep it real simple. This is really a homily and not so much a full-fledged sermon. Some students are, I don't want to give you too much. Some students are pulling in, scriptures from different places, from different books. In a regular intro to preaching course, that would be totally fine. But I want you to stick to where you are because there's a lot of meat where you are, which is Psalm 23. There's a lot of meat there. And the reason why I say that is you don't have a lot of time. So you have 7-8 minutes max, and we don't want to, go over and over and over, and other folks can't get their time in. So you want to make sure that when you're going through your revisions, keep it to Psalm 23, and you're focusing on whatever. Some people are focusing on verses 1 and 2. Some people are focused on 5. Wherever you're focused, and you got enough meat right there. You got lots of good stuff, examples. I see good transitions, but those are the 2 key things that I'm seeing is um, bringing in other scriptures and a lot of points. So you want to make sure that you tailor it for your time frame. Next week. So today is the 20th, and I'm looking at my calendar. Next week, the 27th, we are going to gather for those students who don't want to record it, and they are going to gather with us on Thursday, same time, same place, and you're going to present your sermon. sermon homily. I do have to ask you, please, we don't want to be on here all night. Time it. So you got to practice it at home. 7 to 8 minutes, 7 to 8 minutes. We don't want 15. My God, we don't want 20. 7 to 8 minutes is enough. And you've been working well. So I know that you have 7 to 8 minutes of good meat in there to share. Okay. So next week, we will present those people who feel confident in recording themselves, and they're going to use their phone, and you're going to upload it, and you're going to send me your link on Vimeo or YouTube. Okay. Now remember, I've got to go through all of them. So that's why I'm going to record all of the sermons from next week so that I can go back again and grade them. So it will take me a little while to get through all 11 of them to grade them. So that's why we want to make sure that we're on time and we're presenting. So once again, we're going to present next week, the 27th. You're welcome to join us if you want to listen, but you've already submitted yours via video, okay? All right, so let me pause. Any questions? Super. Just let me know. All right. Everybody, we're going to go to chapter 4 in LaRue's book, Cleophas LaRue. Y'all let me know if you have any questions, okay? Cleophas LaRue. We're going to be in, we're going to be in this book. Can you see it?
Right.
But I like our session last week with the guided reading. I think that worked very well. So if you all go to and those students who are going to be watching the video, you can pause this and go get your book. And we're going to start on chapter 4 starts on page 114. 114. So let's do a little review from last week. Last week we were in chapter 1, and I apologize, y'all. We couldn't finish this whole book. I love this book. I've read this book from cover to cover. It's really good. So if you get a chance, do chapters 2 or 3 or whatever when you get bored. Okay. But last week, do you remember what were some of the characteristics of Black preaching? What did we say?
It appeals. It
Oh,
appeals.
appeals to the emotion. Good.
Strong biblical content.
We gotta have some Bible. If there's no
And
Bible in there, what did we say? It's just like a great speech.
right, creative language. The creative language.
Creative language. And the
Mm,
language, going back to what Mr. Lester said, emotion, the language also helps to build the emotion,
mhm.
the pauses, the volume. Right. I think that, wait a minute, did we get,
Min-
and one more, ministerial
Ministerial authority.
authority. And last week we were looking at Dr. Cosby's video, but remember we talked about terms like antiphonality,
Mhm.
where you get the back and forth kind of conversation between the audience and the preacher.
Mhm.
That's what we mean. Very good, gentlemen. Let's go back to page 114, 115 in chapter 4. We're going to talk about the basic dynamics of the African American sermon. And we are going to highlight a couple things in here and then go to Bishop Vashti McKenzie. But I want to have a good discussion with you. And then I also want to talk about what does Socio-cultural context have to do with it, okay? All right, so let's start. Good evening. Good evening, David. Let's start on page 114. Everybody there? I like how Dr. LaRue says right at the top, first word. He says, though not intended as a how-to manual on sermon preparation. So this book is not like a how-to, but he's studying and telling us what Black preaching is and what it does. He says this book does seek to reflect on the formative influences and preconceptions that impact and shape the Black sermon in its embryonic state. So he's saying, like, as it's coming together, as it's forming and being created, um, which book, David? We are in Cleophas LaRue book, The Heart of Black Preaching. And we're on page 114. All right. So uh, Dr. LaRue is saying that there is a particular shape that the Black sermon will take as it's being created, as the words are forming. And it is typical of African American sermon preparation process. If you go to the 1, 2, 3, you see right there in the middle of page 114. All right. Dr. LaRue says, I have determined that there are three crucial interpretive dynamics at work in the early stages of the African American sermon preparation process. And if you have a pen or highlighter or something, you might want to highlight this. Somebody take number one for us. What did he say number one is?
An understanding of what blacks believe about power and the sovereign God, and how that belief has traditionally informed their sacred story.
Awesome. We're going to highlight these 1, 2, 3, but we'll go ahead and read them. Somebody read 2.
And awareness of and sensitivity to the history and culture of Black life in America.
Black life in America. We started talking about that last week a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
And let's hit number 3.
An insightful competence in describing and addressing the many and varied life situations, dominions, domains of experience that blacks experience daily in America, and an ability to wed the scriptures to those experiences in a practical and relevant manner.
All right. Let's
Mm-hmm.
pull these apart. And once again, if anybody's watching the video, we're on page 114. Okay, David, we are in Cleophas LaRue's book, chapter 4, on page 114. All right, so let's go to number 1. Excuse me, getting over this thing. He said the early stages of the African American sermon prep process. Number 1, an understanding of what blacks believe about the power and the sovereign God and how that belief has traditionally informed their story. So let's just pause a little bit. Those of you who were with me for what's the course? Worship, Christian worship, uh, class, or even church history. I want you to just think about, uh, if you remember back in that class, we talked about how the Black church developed, but the Black church developed because of belief. And they didn't always have to have a particular space, right? Or a big, nice church.
Mm-hmm.
They may have gathered under a tree. They may have gathered by water. But African American preaching and the sermon has to have something about the power of the sovereign God. So, meaning that in African American preaching, It's got to highlight that God can do something or anything and or everything. In the African American preaching style, you will often see the preacher demonstrate or illustrate, let me say, not demonstrate, illustrate what God can do for the person in the pew, power, right? What God has done for the person in the scripture or people in the scripture. Okay. What does it mean to be sovereign? Look at that word sovereign.
Overall, the total control.
Total
But
control.
yeah, but Professor, I wanted to add in this too is, and I think this is in this first statement, understanding what blacks believe about power. And I think one of the themes, if you would, that often runs through the black church is this is hope.
Hope.
And yes, when you look at our uh, the conditions of blacks since they've been in America, we've often been uh, it's often necessary for us to be hopeful in order to survive. So I think this talking about this belief, this association with God and hope has become sort of a uh, one of those natural tenets that I think that you generally see in the black church.
You bring us to a good point, Mr. James. Very good. Go down to, let's go ahead and keep up with hope. Go down to the section down at the bottom of page 114. Okay, so we were talking about hope. Hope what? Well, Mr. James said we have to have hope, and that's one particular thing that we always see in African American preaching. Excuse me. Look at this first line. Why we got to have hope? As a result of their historical marginalization.
Marginalization. Yes.
We could just stop right there. To be marginalized is just that. Like I'm using my hands, like I'm pushing you away. My God, we could just keep going back. Um, to slavery, but even now, oh my goodness, so many things still happening with our children, school systems, the prison system, whatever it is, still being marginalized, pushed to the margin. We don't want to deal with this group. We don't want to deal with that group. They can't come over here, so on and so forth. So why do we need hope every week? Because we're being marginalized every week.
They survive. Mhm.
We got to survive. Very good. I also want you to stay in that sentence too. There's something else you said about relationship, Mr. James. What became most important to Blacks in their encounter with Christianity was a what? An
Intimate
intimate
relationship.
relationship with a powerful God. Let me put that in here.
Mhm.
Intimate relationship. So, what Black preaching will also do is to show the congregation what relationship looks like with the sovereign God. And if that person gets in relationship, here we go back to the H word, they have hope
Mhm.
or more hope, right? Hope. All right, stay right there. Excuse me. Let's go to the top of page 115.
Hmm.
Y'all with me?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go to the paragraph where it starts with powerful Black preaching speaks.
Mhm.
There. And if you have a pen or underline, you can underline that. Powerful, oh, powerful Black preaching speaks for the things of God. speaks for the things of God. LaRue says, I am not arguing that every sermon ought to have the word God in it. Excuse me. But each sermon should concern itself with its, excuse me, should concern itself with God's essence and actions, God's divine initiative and revelatory activity. Um, let's just pause right there. So you want to, I would really highlight that powerful Black preaching is got to speak about God. And I'm gonna put this right here. He said, well, you might mention God, you might, mention Jesus or something. He said, even if you don't necessarily have the particular word, but look, the sermon has got to show or demonstrate or speak of God's essence, power, movement, whether it's salvation or giving someone mercy, grace, showing up, providing for them. So the African American sermon has got to have at the center. Well, really, you know what? I shouldn't even say this. All sermons, really. But the key thing, as we're talking about in this book, the key thing at the center, holding it together, is the movement of God. So LaRue's saying what he has noticed in his studies, and even if you go towards the end of this book, if you just thumb through the end of the book, he has a couple of examples of sermons and he pulls them apart. But it has to have the centrality of God's movement, moving in moving in the scripture, so that the preacher has to show, look at how God moved through these people in the Old or the New Testament, right? And then shows the congregation, this is how God, Ruben, go on mute. And this is how God can move in your individual life. Okay, thank you. All right. All right, keep your books open. I want you to stay right there on that page and scoot down to the next paragraph. Stay right on page 115. Next paragraph starts with this word. The key to the powerful Black sermon that consistently strikes a chord in the hearts of the listening congregation is simple yet profound. He says, what did he say? The sermon must what? Oh, y'all on mute.
It's simple. It must be simple, yet
Must be,
profound. Simple, but
go
yet
after the
profound.
colon.
So it must be about God.
The sermon must be about God.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
Not about their church, not about, and even, okay, watch this. Even if the sermon focuses on a biblical character, like we are using Psalm 23 written by David, we could talk about David, surely, but is the focus David? No, the focus is God providing or keeping or leading or however you bringing it out. The focus is God. Okay. What's Black preaching? Keep your finger right there. Everybody with me? It must bring the listener to some understanding of who God is and what God is about. I want to stop right there. If you have a highlighter, I got my highlighter too. I want to talk about this. And for those people who are watching the video, we're on page 115 in the paragraph that says the key to powerful Black. It says it must bring the listener to some understanding of who God is and what God is about. That's the core. But let me put in a but. Y'all can come off mute. I am, as a preacher, sometimes I get frustrated because I don't hear a lot of this where the listener or the audience people can understand who God is in the text and then translate to who God is for them, because it's so much of a fluff stuff. Or maybe the mm, preacher is focusing on political stuff or the biblical character. Not to say that that's wrong, right? Y'all go ahead, talk back to me. I'll put this in the chat. This is mhm.
Okay, I mean, the preacher, he's got the he or she. Sometimes it's it the situation of the community.
Mhm.
Whatever happened in the news that's impacting everybody. Let's say it was George Floyd's that he's
Yeah.
gotta. I'm just saying he's got to make that the predicate, um, so that people know that he's aware of what's going on, and he's got to interpret how he breaks it down, how he breaks that down of how the how injustice just flourishes, but keep on going. You can't let life detour you.
Mhm.
People, etc., etc. I'm just saying, whatever's going on
Yes.
that affects whatever happening out here that affects us. Whether it's the economy or whatever. We can, like I say, we can't let life detour us. We got to keep going. We got to keep hope. Keep faith in God, so to speak. I'm not saying you got to stay on the news, but you have to
Sure.
weave it in. You have to weave it in the fabric.
And the current affairs, the politics or whatever, is so much a part of our daily lives. I like how you brought up well, my Lord, 2020 and the George Floyd. We had so much going on in that particular year, right? But I like that example where if we were listening to a sermon and we were frustrated about George Floyd and upset about it. So what we hear Mr. LaRue says, there has to be in that sermon some understanding of God and what's God about during this trivial time. And that's really what we mean by theology. What is God doing? What is God saying? What can we expect um, the creator God to do? Is God listening? So sometimes, many times during those highly politicized things, with the election and the January 6th and all this, we're wondering, where is God? God, did you see them running up in the Capitol? You know, what? So that the next sermon we wanted to hear is, where was God? What was God's understanding about January 6th or whatever the situation was? What is God about? What is creator going to do? What is the creator's plan? And so that's what we mean as we pull in LaRue's point here about there's got to be some understanding about God in that text. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What I was going to say,
Yeah.
um, the preacher has to help the congregation come to some understanding of God's personality.
All
Mhm.
Well,
right.
we call him our Father. Well, how is he our Father? What is a father like? What are his attributes as a father? One of the things that I'm dealing with in my sermonette is the term of want. Well, mom and daddy didn't give me everything I want. God ain't gave me everything I wanted. He's giving me everything I need.
Need.
So that's I'm wrestling with that in my sermonette. It's coming to the personality of God.
Very good. And so the personality of God, Reuben, helps us to understand, as LaRue says, uh-oh, That off my page. On page 115 helps us to understand what God is about. To come to some understanding of the Creator. So, right, as Ruben says, as a parent, help me understand. Very good. Anybody else before we go on?
You know, and I appreciate what Ruben said, because I was thinking about along some of the same areas. Sometimes I think not only the preacher, but particularly the congregation, I think we try too hard to think of God in our own concepts and our own, you know, we in human terms, and this is one
In
of the
human terms.
challenges I believe with understanding spirituality is not limiting God to what we can perceive. And I think that sometimes, see, when Ruben said, talk about the character of God. The reality is the character of God is a lot different from what we think of even in human. For instance, we can think of a good person, a person that we think is a good person,
Right.
but that person has so many flaws
Yeah.
that we don't know about. So
Yeah.
we can't even, but so when we think about God, we want to think of God as a good person.
Person.
Instead, we tend sometimes to use that same thing that, well, if we were thinking about a person. So
Right.
sometimes it's hard for us to perceive. For instance, even if there is a tragedy or something, and someone would say, and I've heard people, how can a good or just God allow something like that to happen? Well, we are trying to fit God into
Mm-hmm.
our perception. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the hard things about preaching and is to get people to move beyond your
Yeah.
perception and try, as Ruben was saying to us, understand the true character of God.
And you know what? I like that. Can I piggyback on what you said, Mr.
Oh,
James?
yes.
The hard part, okay, the true character of God. Excuse me. The hard part sometimes with preaching is, like you said, is trying to help the congregation think broadly and to also understand that guess what? We in our humanness do not and will not have all of the answers.
Right.
Okay.
Right. We
But we know one who does have the answers. Maybe we're going when we get on up there, we get some answers. But you know, I'm gonna tell you what really got me was 9/11. I didn't preach that Sunday, but I attended like some Bible studies and things. And the key thing people would ask, why this, why, oh, why? And I don't know.
don't know.
No, we just don't know. Tremendous loss, right? So many different ways. It was just horrible. But no human, we just don't, I don't know.
No capabilities. Right.
Our minds are just not capable. I don't know. And then coming to what we do know is that God took us from there, guided us, and protected us. And, we rebuilt and so on and so forth. But I like that. Helping the congregation to see a little wider.
Right.
Very good.
And one more comment on this, because I think it's along that same line. The English language sometimes, I also believe, becomes a barrier, uh, and how we use it. just even the concept of love and
Uh-huh.
of how we fling it around so loosely. And so even when we say God's a loving God, because we have so many crazy concepts of love, it's hard sometimes for us to appreciate God's love, that a more of a true love.
That
And
is true
but
love.
and a lot of that, some of it, I think, comes from the fact that the English language is such a harsh language just to communicate in,
Mhm.
that it becomes hard for us to gather the concepts that that's trying to be expressed.
Yeah, it is because I don't know if there's really any words that we could really find
Right. Yeah.
to really express the depth, the width, the height of God's love. We just, I don't know. Very good, everybody. Go over to page 116. Page 116. All right. So we started off, you writing your notes. We got to make sure we have the power. We're going to talk about God, first of all, but the power of the sovereign God. And then go over to the top of page 116. What's another dynamic of African American preaching?
Freedom and impartiality.
We got to have it, especially some sense of freedom, some sense of justice or something. Excuse me. Let's go to this paragraph. African Americans have traditionally experienced God. I want you to underline that word, experienced God. We did LaRue didn't say African Americans heard about God or traditionally heard about God. He said they have traditionally experienced God. So that tells us that there is relationship. Uh-oh, I lost my page. That there is relationship. There's some type of talking and walking with God in order to experience the Creator. Sorry, I lost my page. Experience God. I'm still on that same line. As a what kind of judge? Y'all see it there? There
Impart.
you go.
Impartial judge.
Impartial judge of human character and motives. African Americans have known that God is no respecter of persons. That comes from, I believe, Romans is one of the major affirmations of the African American Christian community. Let's just pause right there. You can put a little asterisk next to that. Seeing God as impartial, impartial. So what's that mean? What's that mean to us? We watch the news, right? We see somebody kill somebody showing off. Oh, this soldier the other day we were watching the news. He went into I want to say he roamed over into North Korea.
Oh yeah.
North Korea. Yeah, he roamed over into North Korea. Well, he's in trouble now. He's in trouble now. But we have excuse me, to experience God as impartial. Impartial.
Mhm.
So those speaking to some who are parents or grandparents. You're shaking your head, Mr. James. When we have children,
Everybody.
I can't be partial.
Mhm.
Some act different from the others, but we can't be partial with them and give one grandchild more than the other. Or you're gonna get it. I heard there's something about grandchildren. Y'all just go crazy over the grandchildren. But
I just had a new grandchild
oh, that's right.
about 10 days ago now.
Boy, girl.
This is a girl.
Girl, congratulations.
My
Grandbaby.
13th.
Your 13th
Congratulations, go.
grandbaby.
Yeah.
Oh, Oh, wow. How wonderful. The 13th grandbaby. So that right. So even like this new one getting everything, right? But as my little lady gets older, there are gonna be things that you have set aside for the grandchildren. And this one can get this one. But if one grandchildren get two cookies and the other one got one. Mr. God, you laughing. They want it all. My mom, she just has three. My two and my sister has one. But all she makes sure all three of them, and they're older, the two, they're in college, but she makes sure that she give the same thing to all of them. And I kept saying, well, Colin doesn't need this. She said, no, because I don't want anybody saying I gave one more than the other. Why? Being impartial.
Impartial, right.
Impartial.
Yes.
Impartial. Sometimes it's hard to do, right?
But
For us as
Mr. Being impartial doesn't always mean being exactly equal, because the needs uh, can often vary, and that's even with us, with human beings. And we see God love even in this, in that his impartiality doesn't mean that we all will see the exact same thing.
right. But even in that grace,
Yeah.
even in that grace, the person that may need some more is going to be given that.
If
But even let's say the person didn't have a house, right? And God provides some type of shelter or something for them. But the one that even still is in a house can have a blessing as well.
can have a blessing.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is understanding your blessing,
Oh, that's going
and
to be a
not the
sermon.
other person's blessings.
Understanding your blessing. Mr. J, I might have to preach that one day. I like that.
Did I dovetail on that? Because one thing
Yes, you can.
I would say is the needs are not always the same. For example, if I have my grandchildren over for a cookout,
Uh-huh.
Victoria Rose is 10 years old.
All right.
Yanelle is 2 years old.
Right.
Yanelle's hamburger does not need to be as big as Victoria Rose's hamburger, but they both get a
Absolutely.
hamburger.
That's right. That's right.
But they both get a hamburger. Is that what
They
Right.
they
both.
get? Right.
Yeah.
Because if I give Yanelle the same size hamburger that I gave Victoria Rose, most of it's going to waste.
It's
Right.
going in the trash. And
Right.
to cut that hamburger in half.
Right. A quarter.
What? Right.
Or a quarter, right? Let her come back and ask for something else, but
Right.
we don't want to
No.
waste food.
That, and you get what I was saying. No, blessing, your blessing versus
Yeah, that's right.
someone else's
But,
blessing.
but someone got a bigger stomach, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Than
Right.
the
You
baby.
never know what the needs of someone else might be. And
So
even
true.
if it appears that they may have a bigger blessing, they got a big old house. You may not know the challenges that they're having
In that
in
house.
trying to keep that house.
I know
Exactly.
that's right. Right. Or the people in that house, right?
All the people in that house.
Might be wearing them out. And then the other person staying by themselves is at peace.
At peace. Woo-wee.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
All right. Let's stay right there on page 116 in the section where we have freedom and impartiality. We'll move through this. God's impartiality also, the second paragraph, also disassociates God from the unjust and discriminatory structures of a racist culture, thereby accentuating one of the central biblical emphasis of the nature of God, and that is God's freedom. 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 So God has the freedom to do whatever. Okay. All right, so freedom and impartiality, meaning that the creator God is going to be just, a just judge of character. Okay, let's keep moving. Oh, I think we said this earlier. It's in the chat.
Mhm.
Love and partisanship. Y'all there?
Mhm.
What's going to be present in the African American scripture dynamic? We got to have love. I don't think we get enough of this one. Um,
No
but
way.
let me read that. I know, right? Let's go right there to that first sentence. African American Christians have claimed the impartiality of God, but but they have also affirmed the seemingly contradictory claim that God is on the side of the oppressed. I want you to underline that.
Mhm.
God is on the side of the oppressed. Even if you keep going in um, that chapter, in that paragraph, um, if you were with me, I think this was church history. We talked about liberation theory and things like that, James Cone.
Mhm.
But from Old Testament to New Testament, from Old to New Testament, you will see, I'm going to get you, Ruben, you will see that God is working on behalf of groups of people or one person or something that was marginalized, working with the person who, the woman who was caught in adultery. Jesus is like, oh, oh no, I'm going to take care of you. Hold on, let me step into this situation. We see in Old and New Testament. Let's talk Old Testament. Groups of individuals fighting, um, fighting off enemies. What happens? God takes care of the enemies. They drown up. For example, they drown up in the Red Sea. Exodus. Okay, so from Old Testament to New Testament, we see countless times over and over again that the Creator God stands, supports, hides, covers the men and women who are being hurt, oppressed, however that might mean. If you read a lot of prophetic books. Amos is one of them. So Amos gets a little perturbed because what happens in the book of Amos is like, look, all these rich people, you got all this money and you're oppressing the poor. And he's like, look, I'm telling you, God's gonna God's gonna get you. And sure enough, it does happen. So uh, loving those who have been pushed to the margin. Okay. Oh Lord, look at our time. We're doing good. Uh, I want you to look at top of page 117, and then we're going to hit these three. Somebody talked about this too. The personhood and creativity of God. Okay. Uh, let me see. Look in the chat. Somebody said understanding God's personality. In addition to the impartiality and partisan of God, African Americans have declared that God is personal. God is personal. Let's just pause right there. God is personal. What do we mean by that? Personal. Although God is universal and for all,
I think
but
maybe
go
I think
ahead.
I think maybe it comes down to the idea that a person has to deal with the God of their understanding.
Okay. Of
So,
their understanding.
I think you want me to elaborate on that
Yeah.
because we don't all experience God, I think, in the same way.
All
Uh,
right.
I think some people, when they hear the voice of God, they are hearing something thundering and magnificent, but another person is hearing a still small voice.
So it's personal, right?
Right. Hmm.
It's personal. So very good. Um, and y'all can keep reading in that paragraph. We're gonna keep moving for time. But God is personal to us. LaRue says God is that personal being. And when we say personal, think about it like a personal relationship. So you have personal relationships with friends or, significant other, whatever. Um, in the African American sermon, you're going to hear reference of you're going to hear reference of my God did this, or the creator did this for me, and the creator can do that for you, and making it personal using examples or testimony. And when somebody uses a testimony about what the creator God has done for them, that is personal, right? I mean, oh man, we could stay there all night and just talk about what testimonies did for the Black church. Don't see that too much anymore. But the personhood, and what we mean by that is that the Creator God is seen as not just this cosmic, up in the air, but a personal friend, a personal provider, a parent, however you want to see it. All right. Last two. Let's go down to 117. There's got to be, hey, we talked about this too. There's got to be, who said survival? Somebody said survival earlier. Survival. There's got to be some mention of survival and liberation. Those who were with me before, we talked about James Cone in Black liberation theology. But even if the person doesn't mention Cone by name, there's got to be in that first paragraph. I'm going to read this. The point of departure for Black theology is the biblical God's relation to the Black struggle for liberation. Liberation. Let me put that in the chat. Liberation. So there has to be, we've been right on point tonight. There has to be in African American preaching some addressing to the current stuff that we're trying to survive. And then I don't want to just survive it. How do I liberate and get free? Okay. Whether it's, literal freedom, whether it is freedom in terms of an ideology, or freedom from debt, or freedom from drugs, or from foolishness. What is the liberation? But there's got to be something addressed in that sermon. Okay. Excuse me. And then lastly, looking at time. Lastly, I want to hit two things. Black theology, if you look at the bottom of page 117, and we get these classical conceptions of God. Somebody said that earlier in the chat about how we see God. I'm down at the bottom of page 117, okay? And it says, while it is important to have some sense of how Black theologians view God, attempts to name God's presence and actions in a balanced manner also require an awareness and familiarity with historical understandings of the faith. So there's got to be an awareness of where we have been, an awareness of where we're going. Get my teeth. Okay, lastly, I know we're pushed for time. I wanted to highlight culture. And if you look just real quick on page 120 and page 121, y'all. Page 120 and 121. Here's a big thing. Culture. So the socio cultural context is important. So before we go, let me put this in the chat. Socio-cultural context. Or I should have said the Black socio-cultural context. Um, we have to address the people's unique social situations in which Black people find themselves today. We were talking about this earlier, but let's just, where do people find themselves today? And case in point, we'll use the book. Where do African Americans find themselves today? What's the struggle? Remember, we talked about struggles. So there's still struggles of what? I'm gonna put here education,
Racism, if you would.
racism. Mm-hmm.
I read this article today in Florida where they're trying to, where they're not trying to, where they
Not
basically
trying.
are going to teach African American history different from how it actually happened, even to the
Oh,
point that slavery may have been beneficial
yeah.
to slaves because it gave them additional skills. So,
I heard about that.
uh, very dangerous
Literally,
concept.
it is dangerous. It is dangerous. Yes, that's social cultural context. We are dealing with our history being basically like being erased, and someone
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Oh, we're gonna put our own story in it because we're intimidated, we're or scared." I don't know what their problem is, but yeah. So we put, yes, those diversity issues, and I shouldn't just say in Florida, but it's really happening all across the
All
gamut.
over.
Um, and then also, okay, but also as we talk about sociocultural context, that has to be addressed. I'm down at the bottom of page 121, and I like how Dr. LaRue says this duality of existence should not be overlooked. So meaning that we are African Americans, like we're two people, right?
Mhm.
So you find yourself African American or African or Black or however you want to refer to yourself, and um Black, and then we still have this duality that sometimes, if you're people who find themselves in the workforce, they got to try to be this way, and then come home and then got to be another way. It's almost like you're putting on two different faces in order to survive. That's what that duality of existence means. So the Black preacher has to make sure that they take into context their social location, whether they're in a rural area, they're in an urban area, but really it doesn't matter. It's happening all around. School systems are suffering in the rural areas as well as urban. Not enough teachers anywhere. And so, okay, so as we end right here, see, it's 8:02. As we end right here, the socio-cultural context is important. The preaching should not go forth, and there's no mention to what happened this week. There's no mention to the struggle. And then watch this. We can mention the struggles, but help me get out of it. What's some type of what can I do? What's some type of liberation strategies that the minister can offer the congregation? All right. Any anything else? Any other questions or thoughts that you may want to add in there? Okay. All right. Well, I ran over a little bit there. Um, All right. So for those who are watching the video and my students who are here next week, please y'all jot this down. Next Thursday is the 27th. My goodness, July is almost out of here. We're going to come together and listen to those individuals who want to present with the group. If you feel comfortable, you're going to upload your video. You're going to use your phone and record, and you're going to record it to YouTube or Vimeo, and you're going to send me a link. But next week, we're going to listen to our students who are not doing that, and we're going to listen to their homilies the 27th at 7 p.m. Please make sure that we're here. Please check D2L because I'm getting through the outlines as quick as I can, but I don't want to go through them too fast. The key thing that I'm seeing is you're pulling in other scriptures. You want to be careful. Stay with Psalm 23 because there's so much meat there. And you want to start timing them this week and next week to make sure that you can hit 7 to 8 minutes. And that's it.
But
So
Professor,
yes.
I would assume that if you're going to do a recording, it has to be submitted before Thursday.
Recording, no,
Your sermon.
the recording, make sure Thursday night, the 27th.
Right.
But I can probably, excuse me, everybody, I can probably put that, and you see me looking up in my calendar, I can probably push that out to that Saturday, but I've got to get everything graded that next week to turn into your grades. Okay. You good? All right. And I'll post those dates in your announcements. Okay. All right, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. And please watch out for your grades. I finished half of them. If you didn't get yours yet, nothing wrong. I'm still moving through. Okay.
There are a couple of discussions that you have identified.
I think there are two. I started going through and I was checking a few of them. I'll get those done. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Have a blessed evening.
Good night.
Look
Good night,
like we
everyone.
escaped the storm. All right.